At my daughter's 16th birthday party, I accidentally overheard my husband's best friend saying that it's a pity she's not 18. I kicked him out of the house. And my husband took his side. I'm Megan, I'm 42. My husband, Brian, and I have been together for almost 19 years. We have 5 children, 2 boys, 3 girls, and although parenting that many kids is never easy, I always thought we made a pretty solid team. We had our disagreements, sure, especially when it came to discipline and how to handle teenage drama, but it never felt like something we couldn't work through. For the most part, I believed we were on the same page. At least that's what I told myself. But everything changed on our daughter Lily's 16th birthday. I had been planning her birthday for weeks, maybe months if I'm being honest, because 16 feels like such a milestone. I wanted it to be something special. Not over-the-top sweet 16 party special, just something that showed her how loved she is. I made her favorite cake, a triple-layer red velvet with cream cheese frosting, decorated the house with photos of her growing up, and invited a few of her close friends over for dinner and a movie night in the backyard. Fairy lights, cozy blankets, a big projector screen, it was all set up to be a low-key but magical night. That afternoon, I asked Brian to pick up a few last-minute things, ice, some extra snacks, nothing major, and he said he would, but he seemed distracted. He'd been off lately, distant in a way I couldn't quite place. I chalked it up to work stress and kept moving because let's be honest, with 5 kids and a birthday to prep for, I didn't have the bandwidth to chase down every weird vibe. When he got home, he dropped the bags on the kitchen counter without a word and went straight to our room. I followed him a few minutes later to ask if he could help me string up some lights, and I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone like it had personally offended him. I asked if everything was okay. He just said, "Yeah, just tired," and stood up to help. But he wasn't present. Not really. The party itself went fine on the surface. Lily was glowing the whole evening, surrounded by her friends, giggling under the stars, taking selfies with her little siblings, and making me feel like maybe, just maybe, I'd done something right as a mom. But Brian? He kept disappearing. First to take a call, then to check something in the garage, then just sitting alone in the living room, nursing a beer and scrolling through his phone like he was counting down the minutes until it was all over. At one point, I found him standing off to the side of the yard, watching Lily laugh with her friends. His face was tight, unreadable. I asked him if he was okay and he looked at me and said, "She's growing up too fast." There was something in the way he said it, like it wasn't just a casual dad remark, but a warning I didn't understand at the time. I put a hand on his arm and told him that's what happens, they grow up, but that it's okay. He didn't say anything, just nodded and walked back inside. After the party, when the kids were in bed and the leftover cake was wrapped up in the fridge, we sat down in the kitchen. I expected to hear him say he was proud of how the night turned out or maybe even crack a joke about how much money we just spent on snacks and decorations. Instead, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't like the way she looks at me." I blinked. "Who?" "Lily." I felt like I'd been slapped. "What are you talking about?" He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "She's too, affectionate. It's not normal." I just stared at him. "She's your daughter, Brian." "I know that," he snapped, and then softer, "I know. But something's off." It was like the room dropped 10 degrees. I told him he needed to be really careful with what he was implying because that kind of statement, especially coming from a father, was heavy. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I just think we should talk about boundaries. With all the kids. Not just Lily." I couldn't even process it. This was our daughter's 16th birthday. A night that was supposed to be about celebrating her. And instead, here we were, having a conversation that made me feel like the floor was cracking beneath me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake wondering what he meant, wondering what I'd missed, wondering how we'd gone from a parenting team to something that suddenly felt like strangers whispering in separate corners of the same house. And that was only the beginning. We had a party by our pool, nothing extravagant, but I did everything I could to make the day feel special for Lily. The budget was tight, we've got 5 kids after all, but I refused to let that stop me from putting together something meaningful. I borrowed some decorations from a friend, repurposed old string lights we usually save for Christmas, and made a playlist full of Lily's favorite songs, the kind she hums in the kitchen when she thinks no one's listening. I baked the cake myself, a 3-tiered chocolate and vanilla swirl with the red buttercream roses she always begs for on her birthday. I'd even hand-cut letters for a little banner that read, "Sweet 16 Lily," and strung it between 2 trees near the pool. Every detail was about her. This was her day and I wanted her to feel that in every smile, every photo, every moment. Lily had one request. One small thing she'd mentioned weeks before and reminded me of twice the night before her birthday. She wanted to be the only one at the party wearing a red swimsuit. It seemed like such a simple ask, almost symbolic, like she wanted to feel set apart, special, noticed in a way that wasn't just about being the birthday girl. I made sure to message her close friends ahead of time, just a quick, "Hey, Lily's only request is that she be the one in red, just so you know." And they were all sweet about it, responding with smiley faces and "got it" texts. When she stepped out of the house and walked toward the pool, I couldn't help but stop and stare. She looked beautiful. Not in that pageant-y, uncomfortable way, but in that real, radiant way that only 16-year-olds can, when the sun hits just right and they still have that last trace of childhood softening their features. Her red swimsuit was bold but tasteful, high-waisted, with a crisscross back she'd picked out months ago and begged to save up for. She wore it with quiet confidence, her hair pulled into a high ponytail, gold hoops twinkling in the sunlight, and that bright smile that reminded me of when she was 6 and convinced she was a mermaid. Her siblings were already in the pool, splashing and laughing, and her friends cheered when they saw her. Music was playing, kids were eating chips and slices of watermelon, and for a few hours, it felt like all the struggles of the past year faded away. Watching Lily laugh with her friends, her feet dangling in the water, the red of her suit standing out like a spotlight against the sea of blues and blacks and greens around her, it made me feel like I'd done something right. I stood back for a while, watching it all unfold, letting her have that moment where the world revolved around her, because if anyone deserved it, it was Lily. Among the guests that afternoon was Rick, my husband's best friend since high school, the kind of friendship people describe as brothers for life, the type that survived college, weddings, kids, and every stupid or reckless thing they ever did in between. Rick has always been around, showing up at our house like it's his second home, cracking open beers with Brian, making offhand jokes that only the two of them seem to find funny, and calling our kids his little army, like he had some honorary uncle title. He's one of those guys who never really grew out of that easy charm or the slightly immature humor, but he's been loyal to Brian at least, and I always tried to respect that. Rick showed up to the party with his newest girlfriend, Taylor, a girl so young it was hard not to stare. Not because of how she looked, though she was undeniably pretty, but because she barely looked older than Lily. I don't mean that literally, but close enough that it made me do a double take the first time he introduced her a few months ago. She's got that polished, Instagram filter look, with long shiny hair and lashes that could fan a campfire, and she speaks with this soft little voice that makes everything she says sound like a question. I always had my doubts about the whole thing, not just the age difference but the way Rick looks at her, possessive but performative, like he's showing her off rather than genuinely loving her, but I never said anything. Not to Rick and not to Brian. I've learned over the years that inserting myself into Rick's romantic life is a losing battle. He goes through girlfriends like most people go through seasonal wardrobes, always something new, always something younger, and never anyone who lasts long enough to learn the names of all our kids. Taylor had only been around for a few weeks, but she was already calling Brian Bree, and laughing a little too hard at his dad jokes, and something about it rubbed me the wrong way. Still, I let it go. It was Lily's day and I wasn't going to let Rick's choices, or Taylor's too short shorts and flirty smile, pull my focus away from my daughter's birthday. During the party, while everyone was outside by the pool laughing, splashing, and soaking up the sun, I slipped away for a moment to grab some extra towels from the laundry room. It was one of those small mom instincts. I noticed a couple of kids were dripping wet without anything to dry off with, and I figured it would only take a minute. The laundry room is tucked just beside my husband's office, which we'd been using as a sort of makeshift cloakroom for the day, where guests could toss their bags, purses, or whatever they didn't want lying around the pool. As I was reaching up to grab a stack of folded towels from the top shelf, I paused when I heard a voice. At first, I thought maybe someone had come in behind me, but then I realized the voice was coming from the office. The door wasn't fully closed, just pushed mostly shut, and through the small gap I could hear Rick talking. His voice was low, urgent in a way that didn't match the easygoing, beer-in-hand persona he'd been wearing all afternoon. At first I didn't catch what he was saying, but then I heard a laugh, a short, humorless one, and a few words that stopped me cold. "She doesn't suspect a thing." He was definitely on the phone, pacing from the way his footsteps tapped across the hardwood floor, and his tone wasn't flirty, but it was familiar, too casual for a business call. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I really wasn't, but something about the way he spoke made my stomach tighten. I froze with the towel still in my arms, ears straining despite myself as he said, "Nah, Brian's too busy playing family man, and Megan's all wrapped up in her perfect little party." There was a pause and then more muffled words I couldn't make out, followed by, "She wore the red one just like you said." My heart skipped, not entirely sure what that meant, but I suddenly felt like I shouldn't be standing there, like I'd walked into something I wasn't meant to hear. I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound, and took the long way back to the pool, my mind racing with questions I couldn't begin to answer. His words hit me like a blow to the chest, so sudden and sickening that I almost dropped the towels right there on the floor. At first, I wasn't even sure I'd heard him correctly. My brain rejected it, tried to reshape the sounds into something innocent, something that didn't make my skin crawl, but then he said it again, clearer this time, as if he didn't have a care in the world who might be within earshot. "She looked so hot in that red swimsuit," he said, low and chuckling under his breath. I swear if she was already 18. I don't even know what came after that. My ears were ringing, my whole body frozen in place, heart thudding so loudly I could barely hear the rest of his sentence, but I caught something about serving God by resisting temptation, like he was somehow trying to twist the filth in his mouth into something noble. That was when it clicked, with a terrible, cold certainty that made my stomach turn. He was talking about Lily. My daughter. My 16-year-old daughter. My throat tightened so fast I could barely breathe. The towels slipped from my arms and landed in a heap on the laundry room floor, but I didn't care. My hands were shaking. I pressed myself flat against the wall, trying to stay out of view in case he walked out suddenly, trying to decide what to do, what to say, how to even move. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the house. Rage, horror, disbelief, all of it came crashing into me at once, a storm I couldn't contain. And yet he just kept talking, pacing around that office with his smug little tone, completely unaware that I was standing just a few feet away, every fiber of my being screaming in silence. I froze, completely paralyzed as the weight of his words sank deeper and deeper into my bones. This was Rick, the same Rick who had sat in our living room more times than I could count, cracking jokes with Brian, lounging on our couch like it was his own, ruffling our kids' hair, bringing over pizza on random Fridays and acting like part of the family. The same man who used to lift Lily onto his shoulders when she was little and spin her around until she giggled so hard she had tears in her eyes. The man who bought her a ukulele for Christmas one year because she mentioned liking the sound of it in a song. That Rick. And now I was hearing him speak about my daughter, my baby, in a way that made my skin crawl, in a way no decent human being should ever speak about a child. I stood there, back pressed against the cool wall, eyes wide, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might break through my chest. The sound of blood rushing in my ears drowned out everything for a moment, a wave of pure, overwhelming fury and nausea sweeping over me. My throat burned with the scream I was holding in, my hands trembling not with fear, but with pure, unfiltered rage. Anger doesn't even begin to cover what I felt in that moment. It was something deeper, more primal, a fierce disgust that clawed up my throat and wrapped around my ribs like a vice. I couldn't move. I couldn't think straight. All I could do was replay those disgusting words in my head over and over, spoken so casually by a man I had trusted in my home, around my children, in our lives. I wanted to burst into that office and rip the phone out of his hand, demand to know what the hell he thought he was doing, scream at him to never come near Lily again, but I was frozen, caught in that terrible moment between realization and reaction, a mother holding back the full force of a storm about to break. I didn't wait a second longer. I stormed out of that hallway, my legs moving before my brain could even catch up, driven purely by the fury building inside me. I marched straight outside, past the laughter and splashing, past the fairy lights and cake table, past Lily and her friends, and I grabbed Brian by the wrist without a word. He looked confused, startled even, trying to ask what was wrong, but I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking. I dragged him inside, past the kitchen and down the hall, straight into our bedroom and shut the door behind us so hard the windows shook. The second we were alone, I spun on him, my voice trembling with rage as I told him what I heard, every disgusting word, every vile implication. His face went pale, and before he could say anything, before either of us could process the weight of it, I turned around and went for Rick. I didn't care that people were still outside, that the music was playing and guests were eating chips by the pool. I threw open the office door, and he looked up at me like I was just being dramatic, like this was all some misunderstanding, as if I hadn't heard exactly what I heard. I screamed at him to get the hell out of my house. Not tomorrow. Not after the party. No. Right now. Brian came running down the hall after me, still trying to catch up, but I was already beyond reason. I didn't care if anyone outside heard. I didn't care if I was making a scene. Rick stood there for a second, acting stunned, and then he had the audacity to start defending himself, raising his voice, saying I was overreacting, calling me crazy, saying I was violating his privacy. Privacy? In my home? Around my child? He tried to spin it, of course. Said I misunderstood, claimed I was taking things out of context, and then, when that didn't work, he turned nasty. Started calling me names, accusing us of being paranoid, trying to paint himself as the victim. But it didn't matter. I wasn't listening. I couldn't listen. I was done. I pointed at the door and told Brian that if Rick didn't walk out that second, I would call the police myself. Brian didn't argue. He didn't say a word. He just stood there frozen, pale, watching me unravel as I forced his best friend, the man he trusted since they were kids, out of our house like the trash he had shown himself to be. Brian stood there in the hallway, completely confused, his eyebrows drawn together and his hands half raised like he was still trying to piece together what had just happened. He kept asking me what was going on, why I was screaming, why I had thrown Rick out like that in the middle of our daughter's birthday party, but I couldn't even look at him without shaking. I was still shaking. My whole body felt like it was vibrating with rage and disgust, like the weight of what I had just heard was still pressing down on my chest and I couldn't breathe properly. When I finally managed to get the words out, when I told him what I heard, every awful detail, every sickening sentence that came out of his best friend's mouth, it was like something shifted in the room. Brian's face went completely blank for a moment, like his mind just short-circuited. Then he blinked, shook his head and said something that made me want to scream all over again. "Let's talk after the party," he said. "We don't want to ruin Lily's day." I just stared at him, my mouth slightly open, stunned that he could say something like that after what I just told him. That this was about preserving the party, about keeping up appearances, about not making a scene. As if a man talking about our 16-year-old daughter like that wasn't already a scene in my head I'd never be able to unsee. But I bit my tongue. I clenched my jaw so tight it hurt and nodded once, not for him but for Lily. Only for Lily. Because this day was hers, and no matter how broken I felt in that moment, no matter how betrayed and furious and scared I was, I couldn't take that away from her. Not yet. So I swallowed it, buried it deep inside me like a live wire, and forced myself to walk back out into that backyard with a smile that didn't reach my eyes and a heart that was already splintering. After the party, when the last slice of cake had been eaten, the lights unplugged, the damp towels tossed in a basket by the door, and Lily had gone to bed still beaming from the day, I sat Brian down and brought it up again. I didn't wait, didn't dance around it or try to ease into the conversation. I went straight to it because I had been holding it inside for hours and it was burning through my chest. I told him everything again, word for word, detail for detail, and this time I made sure he looked me in the eye and understood that this wasn't a misunderstanding or some emotional overreaction. I needed him to be with me on this. I needed him to be outraged, to be protective, to feel even a fraction of the fury that was still coursing through my body. I needed him to be Lily's father first and Rick's friend second. But instead, he sat there in silence for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his words landed like a punch to the gut. He said, I need to hear from Rick." I stared at him, stunned, blinking like maybe I had misheard because there was no way he had just said that. But he had. He repeated it, softer this time, almost like he knew how badly it was going to hurt me. Before I jumped to any conclusions, I need to talk to him. I couldn't breathe. I felt like the walls were closing in around me. Was his friendship really more important to him than protecting our daughter? Was the years-long bond with a man who just spoke about Lily like she was some object to be admired and waited for more valuable than the safety and innocence of his own child? I could feel the heat rising in my face, my jaw tightening so hard it ached, but beneath the anger was something far more painful, betrayal. In that moment, it felt like I was standing alone, trying to shield our daughter from something vile and dangerous, and the one person who should have been standing beside me holding the line, was too busy worrying about preserving a friendship that should have been incinerated the second those words were spoken. Brian left the next morning without saying much, just told me he was going to talk to Rick, that they needed to have a conversation face-to-face, man-to-man. I asked him how long he'd be gone, and he just shrugged, avoiding my eyes already halfway out the door. I spent the entire day with this sick feeling in my stomach, a knot that twisted tighter every time I looked at Lily, who was happily scrolling through photos from her party, completely unaware of the storm that had been building just beyond the glow of fairy lights and birthday candles. I kept telling myself that Brian would come home angry, that he'd confront Rick, see through the lies and come back ready to stand by me, by us, by Lily. But he didn't come home that night. I texted him around dinner time. No answer. I called later. Straight to voicemail. I barely slept, lying in our bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how the man I'd spent nearly 2 decades with could be sleeping under the same roof as the person who spoke about our daughter like that. I didn't know what was worse, his silence or the terrifying possibility that he didn't think what Rick had said was as serious as it really was. When he finally walked through the front door the next afternoon, looking like someone who had spent the night on a couch with too much whiskey and too little conscience, I was already braced for disappointment. He didn't say hello. He didn't kiss me. He just sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Rick explained everything." I crossed my arms and waited. According to Brian, Rick hadn't been talking about Lily at all. He claimed the red swimsuit comment was about some girl from high school, a story he suddenly remembered conveniently about a girl who always wore red to the pool. "It was just a weird coincidence," Brian said, as if that explained everything, as if that erased what I'd heard with my own ears. He even laughed a little when he said it, like the whole thing had been blown out of proportion, like I should feel relief now that the mystery had been solved. I didn't believe a single word of it. Not the story, not the tone in Brian's voice, not the tired excuses he had clearly let Rick spoon-feed him through the night. I just stared at him, completely hollowed out, because it wasn't just what Rick had said anymore. It was that Brian had heard my fear, my outrage, my certainty, and still chose to go play sleepover with the man I had thrown out of our house for talking about our daughter like she was some future trophy. He believed Rick's story. Or maybe he just wanted to. Either way, I knew in that moment I was more alone in this than I ever expected to be. I looked at Brian, really looked at him, and for a moment I didn't recognize the man sitting across from me. His face was tired, maybe ashamed, but not enough, not nearly enough. My voice shook as I asked him the question that had been eating at me since he opened his mouth with that pathetic excuse. Even if it wasn't Lily, if by some miracle Rick had actually been talking about some other girl, wasn't it still a 16-year-old? Did that somehow make it better? Was that what he was telling me? That fantasizing aloud about a child was acceptable so long as it wasn't our child? He didn't answer right away. He just sat there, rubbing his temples, sighing like he was the one who'd been hurt, like the weight of the situation was something unfair being dropped into his lap. I pressed harder, my voice rising now, the fury starting to spill out again. "Does it matter whose daughter it is? Whose child? You're really going to sit here and tell me this isn't a red flag?" I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, that same boiling anger creeping back up into my throat. "This isn't just a joke, Brian. This isn't something you laugh off and explain away with some half-baked story from high school. This is a man talking about a teenage girl like she's a waiting game, like she's something he can claim the second she hits some magic number." Still he said nothing. And that silence, God, that silence, hurt more than anything he could have said. Because silence meant doubt. Silence meant hesitation. Silence meant that some part of him was still trying to protect Rick, still trying to believe that this could be brushed aside, that we could pretend none of it happened, just so he wouldn't have to let go of his oldest friend. But I wasn't protecting anyone. Not anymore. I didn't care if it was Lily or someone else's daughter. 16 is 16. A child is a child. And any grown man who speaks about them like that, even once, is not someone I want within 10 miles of my home, my children, or my husband. My teenage son must have been coming down the stairs or passing through the hallway, because at some point during that tense, awful conversation he overheard part of what we were saying. I didn't even realize he was there until he suddenly appeared in the doorway with his arms crossed, his face flushed with anger, and his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. He looked at me, then at Brian, and said, "You're talking about Rick, aren't you?" Before either of us could respond, he jumped in again, his words tumbling out, fast and furious, like he'd been holding them in for a while. "He's always been weird," he said. "Like, seriously. He's always asking me if there are any hot girls at school. Like, not just once, every time I see him. He'll nudge me and say stuff like, 'You got a girlfriend yet? Bet the girls in your class are starting to look good?' And I always thought it was just him being creepy or trying to be funny, but now it makes sense." I felt my stomach drop, the room spinning slightly as I tried to absorb what he was saying. Brian just sat there, silent again, his expression unreadable. My son kept going, his jaw tight, eyes darting toward the floor like it was hard to say out loud. He always tried to give Lily and her friends rides. He'd offer even when no one asked him to. Like after-school stuff or if we had people over. He'd say things like, "I don't mind playing chauffeur for the pretty ones." I thought it was gross, but I didn't think he was serious. It all started to click. Piece by piece, all the little moments that felt odd but were easy to dismiss in isolation suddenly fit together like a puzzle I never wanted to see finished. The way Rick always lingered when Lily's friends were around, the way he'd laugh a little too loudly at their jokes, how he'd offer to help clean up after their sleepovers or drop by during girl nights, just to say hi. Things I chalked up to Rick being over-involved, awkward maybe, or too casual with boundaries. But now, hearing it from my son, hearing that Rick's comments weren't just a slip of the tongue, that this had been a pattern, it confirmed everything I was afraid to admit. It wasn't just a one-time conversation caught by accident. This had been going on for a while and somehow I hadn't seen it for what it was. But now I did. Now I knew. And now there was no turning back. I waited until the house was quiet that evening. After the dishes were done and the younger kids were tucked into bed, their laughter and energy finally faded into the soft hum of the night. I found Lily in her room, still glowing from the party, scrolling through photos with a sleepy smile on her face. My heart clenched just looking at her. How innocent she still was, how unprepared she should be for something like this, and yet how important it was that she knew the truth. I sat beside her on the bed and gently asked her to put her phone down, telling her there was something we needed to talk about, something serious. She looked worried immediately, her smile fading as she searched my face. I reached for her hand and held it tight, steadying my own voice before I began. I told her carefully, choosing each word like it was glass I didn't want to shatter. I said that Rick had said things he should never have said, and that none of it was her fault. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong, that sometimes adults, even ones we think we can trust, cross boundaries that should never be crossed. I didn't go into graphic detail, but I made it clear that what I'd heard wasn't okay, and that I believed her, that I would always believe her no matter what. She went completely still, her eyes wide, and for a long moment she didn't say anything. Then her chin began to tremble and the tears started falling. She whispered, "I always thought something was off." Her voice cracked and she looked at me with that familiar childlike need for reassurance, but there was fear behind it now. He'd touch my shoulder sometimes, like when he was behind me or leaning in to talk. I never liked it. It gave me this feeling like I needed to step away. I felt my chest tighten as she kept going, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, her voice shaking. One time he invited me to his apartment complex pool. Just me. He said I could bring a friend if I wanted, but I didn't go. I told him I was busy, but I wasn't. I didn't want to be alone with him. I wanted to scream, to rage, to break something. But I stayed still for her, kept holding her hand, nodding slowly, telling her again and again that she did the right thing. That she was brave. That I was proud of her. That I would protect her. Her whole body was trembling, but she leaned into me, and I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as tightly as I could without breaking. She cried quietly against my shoulder, and I just kept whispering the same words over and over. "You're safe. You did nothing wrong. I'm here. I promise I'm here." I told Brian as calmly as I could manage that I didn't want him around our kids, any of them, until he came to terms with the truth, until he could look me in the eye and admit that Rick is dangerous. Not misunderstood, not misquoted, not taken out of context. Dangerous. I stood there in the middle of our kitchen, my arms crossed tightly over my chest like armor, and said it flat out. Until he puts his daughter's safety above his loyalty to a man who clearly crossed a line, I can't trust him to be a father right now. He looked at me like I had slapped him. His mouth opened like he was about to argue, to plead, to explain, but I stopped him with just a look. There was no more room for excuses, not in this house, not when our daughter had cried in my arms the night before, scared and shaken by memories she hadn't even realized were warning signs until now. Brian tried to say it wasn't that simple, that Rick had always been his brother in everything but blood, that maybe this was all some horrible misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. But that's the problem. He still wants to believe Rick over us. We've been sleeping in separate rooms since the night he came home from Rick's place, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. The space between us isn't just about anger, it's about betrayal. It's about watching the man I've loved for nearly 2 decades fail the most important test of his life, not just as my husband but as a father. Every time he tries to justify Rick's behavior, every time he hesitates to say the words out loud, that his best friend is not safe to be around our children, I feel something in me pull farther away. And the worst part is, I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust him again. Not after this. Not when the person I needed to stand beside me in this storm chose to shield the one who caused it. The only thing I know for sure, the one truth that has cut through all the noise and pain and doubt, is that Rick will never be near my children again. I don't care how long he's been part of our lives, I don't care how many memories he and Brian share, or how many times he sat at our table or held our babies or laughed in our living room. None of that matters now. Whatever he once was to this family, whatever place he thought he held in our lives, it's over. That door is closed, bolted, and buried under the weight of what I know, of what I heard, of what Lily remembered with tears in her eyes. Even if it means losing my husband, I will not waver on this. Because I will not allow anyone, not a neighbor, not a teacher, not a stranger, and certainly not a so-called family friend, to jeopardize the safety of my children. I won't be gaslit or reasoned out of my instincts as a mother, and I will not soften my stance to protect a man who has already shown he has no boundaries. If Brian chooses to keep making excuses, if he chooses Rick over the safety of our daughter, then he is making his choice very clear. And as painful as it is to even imagine our family breaking apart, that pain will never outweigh the duty I have to protect my children from harm. Rick is gone. That is final. And if Brian can't live with that, then maybe he's already gone too.